So, my name is Robert A Rieck Jr. My pronouns are he, his, him. I also like to add handicap and disabled. I am a full-time animal rights vegan activist. I am an author, and I am an ally against all forms of oppression. And I just like to consider myself a decent human being. The origin to develop this presentation began with a personal ask from a Black friend of mine who thought it would be positively impactful to share my personal testimony of white privilege to her coworkers and her supervisors at her place of employment. At the time when she asked me, I felt like that was not only a compliment of my character, but it was an obligation and opportunity for me to be part of dismantling white racism as a white Caucasian male who identifies himself as someone who's an ally against those who are being oppressed. What I do have to share with my presentation is basically just a scratch of the surface of information. So it's way short of substantial information that I feel is going to be more attainable through extended education courses, maybe college courses, and also books. At the end of this presentation, I am going to recommend a couple of books. I have like 4 books I'd recommend. Again, that's just, there's a lot more out there, but there's some that I'm going to recommend. I hope by the end of this presentation and what I share today, it's going to create a necessary curiosity in each and every one of you for you to seek out this information to become more empathetically informed. So I was born in 1975, and I was raised and lived in small community towns here in Nebraska, throughout Nebraska. And from what I can remember of these small towns, these are some of the towns I lived in. None of them had a blend of ethnicity. It was basically just being raised in a town that was just full of Caucasian individuals. Okay, so here's the little question you guys can think about. I will bring it up and show you here what the answer is. But let's think about what is Nebraska's state motto. March of 1867, when Nebraska became part of the United States, the state motto was equality before law. I found this information out. Well, actually, what's interesting about this equality before law, since it was in 1867, what's interesting is it wasn't until 100 years later, in June 1967, when it was even legal for a white person to marry a Black person. So that was like 55 years ago. I saw this story in Lincoln Journal-Star about a white lady who went on her first date with a Black man, and their date was interrupted because the police officers arrested her on grounds of suspicious activity of prostitution, because they couldn't believe that a white lady would actually go on a date with a Black guy. So the story ended basically on a good note that they ended up getting married and having a family together. But that just kind of shows that it's kind of interesting that Nebraska has had this motto for that long, and it didn't take them till 100 years for them to even legalize white and Black people to marry each other. So my family stood out from other small town families in these towns because I was part of an unorthodox religion called Jehovah's Witnesses. One of the ways this religion was different from other religions is that we viewed all humans as equals. So members basically would refer to each other as brothers and sisters. We would have visiting overseers coming in from large cities, and we'd always have different ethnicities and different skin tones that would visit our congregation. And then once a year, we would go to Lincoln to assemble at a big old congregation called the district convention, which is also full of all kinds of people. When my family moved to Lincoln, when I was in 4th grade, my mother continued to show her actions that all people are equal, because we had a Black babysitter named Edie Patterson. And my brother and I, we did Bible studies with Brother Allen, who is a Black gentleman who is also a power wheelchair. But because I was raised in this kind of lifestyle, respecting everyone as my equal, I automatically thought those with different types and amounts of skin color were being treated as equal in every way of their life. Me and my siblings, we grew up. I have a younger brother, a younger sister, and an older sister. My younger sister has 5 biracial Black children, and my older sister has 3 biracial Black children. Having Black brother-in-laws was when I started first hearing about personal experience accounts of them claiming to be treated negatively because of their skin color. My Black brother-in-laws politely put up with my ignorance at the time because I spoke to them as if they mistakenly thought their experience involved their race. I tried to convince them that such racism does not exist, and it is only how they are conducting themselves around others that makes a difference. I was basically telling them that they were doing something wrong, and that ignited an unfavorable response from a Caucasian individual. I didn't know this at the time, but that reasoning was based on the fact I have never experienced anything like that, nor have I been in the presence of witnessing such injustice. For how could I, as a Caucasian individual, witness discrimination and racism when I spent most of my time with the majority of population being other Caucasian individuals? I'd never spent a significant amount of time with non-Caucasian individuals in any social environment. The time I did spend with them was either at their house, my house, or the place of worship. And of course, in all those places, I did feel like we treated them as equals. Sadly, it wasn't until I started to attend college in the human services section of Southeast Community College, where I was taking the appropriate amount of classes to become an alcohol and drug counselor, before really learning about discrimination and racism. I took multicultural classes taught by Black and multi-ethnic professors. These professors taught me things like, when it was not just common to socially attend a lynching, but it was also something worthy to record by getting memorabilia postcards of the people being lynched in order to send to family members, similar to what we do today when we go on vacation and send pictures and postcards of something that we had the great opportunity to be in the presence of. I was learning about a young teenage Black boy named Emmett Till, who was brutally killed and murdered for talking to a Caucasian woman, and the murdering Caucasian perpetrators being found not guilty. I was riding the city bus to get to and from my classes at Southeast Community College, and had many observational experiences witnessing these city bus drivers treat other people differently. Those qualifying as a minority were often treated with less kindness and empathy. I often felt if only these bus drivers were able to take extended education classes about various cultures, diversities, and minorities, they probably would enjoy their job better and be more prone to treat everyone with equal kindness. As I was learning about past events, I was also paying attention to current events, like in 2012, when Trayvon Martin, a 17-year-old Black boy, was killed by George Zimmerman, who was later found not guilty. I got together with some family members to include my older sister's Black husband and his brother-in-law, to his brother, to do a sign holding for the injustice of Trayvon Martin here at the Federal Building in Lincoln, Nebraska. My brother-in-law was targeted to a loud comment coming from a Caucasian individual riding a motorcycle when he yelled, "They should have killed that N-word a long time ago." While my brother-in-law stayed composed, I was angered and confused. Also, during that sign holding, my brother-in-law's brother was practicing his citizen rights of holding a sign while crossing O Street when the signal sign would lawfully allow him to do so. As he walked across, he would face all these vehicles that had been stopped at the light and most likely had made eye contact with those in their vehicles. As time was passing, those of us on the corner of the Federal Building noticed a Lincoln police officer truck pull up and park close to where my brother-in-law's brother was, walking back and forth across O Street. I observed the officer witnessing my brother-in-law's brother from his rearview mirror for about 5 minutes, and then the officer got out of his vehicle and approached him and started talking to him for a little bit. I do not remember for sure how long we spent out there that day with our signs, but when we got together at the end of the day, I asked my brother-in-law's brother what the officer had told him. From what I can remember, he either told him that he cannot, or he told him that to either stop walking across the street, or told him that, to do it some other place somewhere else. But the whole point is, either way, an officer of the law cannot instruct someone to stop doing something that is not illegal at all. And at the time I thought, and who was scared or even concerned enough to call law enforcement because of witnessing a Black man legally walking across the street holding a sign? There was also a time when my little sister, along with her 5 biracial Black children and Black fiance, purchased a home in a predominantly Caucasian neighborhood here in Lincoln. The community in which they lived had a lake that was only for residents only. My brother-in-law with a couple of my nephews were fishing at this lake when a police officer showed up to tell my brother-in-law this was a private residence lake. My brother-in-law told the officer the address in which he lived at. The officer demanded to see my brother-in-law's driver's license, and if he had refused, he was going to be placing him under an arrest. My brother-in-law complied, but it wasn't until the police officer showed up at my Caucasian sister's residence to speak to her before he felt good enough to leave. One last true story involving that same sister was when her and her fiance, they had to commute to work together because they only had one vehicle. So my sister worked at University of Nebraska. They'd drive the one vehicle there, and she would get out, go to work, and he would sit in the car while waiting for his uncle to pick him up to take him to a car detailing business. There were several times when my brother-in-law was just sitting in the vehicle when the police showed up, the university police were called because of a suspicious Black man sitting in a vehicle. And each one of these times that a police was called, they did not trust the testimony of my brother-in-law, and they always had to verify it with my Caucasian sister, which often disrupted her at her work. Let's talk about my white privilege. In each of these real life examples I shared with you today, where I personally witnessed acts of racism or immediately found out about such acts after they had happened toward Black family members, I am very confident as a Caucasian white male with a physical disability requiring the use of a power wheelchair, I will never experience being treated unfairly on the basis of my skin color. As an animal rights vegan activist, I have touted several signs in different protests, awarenesses, walks, public sidewalk activism involving showing the violent nature of animal agriculture, doing street activism surveys involving and approaching people on public sidewalks, asking them to participate. I do a lot of things that are unorthodox, unusual, something you don't see very often, like a table setting up on the middle of a public sidewalk with signs saying, "I'll pay you $1 to watch a 5-minute video." I don't believe I have ever had the police officers or law enforcement called on me, but if someone did, at most, all I saw was a police officer vehicle drive by and disappear. That is my white privilege. If I were to drive out to any private lake today and start fishing, I highly doubt a police officer is going to show up. And if there are neighbors questioning who I am, since I am Caucasian, they'll probably come down to the lake and have a civil conversation with me, talking to me about what I'm fishing for, or when I moved in and where I moved. It would be more like a time of welcoming me to the neighborhood instead of cautiously peering out my blinds of the window and being scared to approach me because I'm Black. That is my white privilege. If I were to park my van at the university area and sit there for a duration of time, I highly doubt police officers are going to show up questioning why I'm there. Actually, my experience is able-bodied people in general will approach me and say, "Hey, are you all right, sir?" Because they kind of think that I need able-bodied intervention. When I was younger, I used to get very offended when able-bodied people ask me this, but as I'm older, there are times that I might get in a position that I don't want to be in. So I will actually be more welcoming to that kind of intervention. My whole point is my white privilege will never put me into a category of being suspicious. And even if someone did call the police on me because I was sitting in my van, it would more or less be a welfare check to make sure I am all right. That is my white privilege. Being in a power wheelchair since shortly after September 30th, 1996, I feel like I have always been viewed as a victim, like a victim of an accident or something that didn't go right, or that it definitely wasn't my fault. That's the kind of warm reception I get from people as they are talking to me or giving me nonverbal communication through smiles. Most people are shocked to find out that I put myself in this power wheelchair by a failed suicide attempt. That is my white privilege. If I was a Black man in a power wheelchair and using my own past ignorant thinking and reasoning mixed in with racism, I could easily be seen by the majority Caucasian others as someone in a wheelchair because I did something wrong. Maybe I was involved in gay life, or maybe it was a drug deal that went bad. But I'm not viewed like that because I have white privilege. Systematic white privilege exists in America because Caucasians have always been the majority, and everything constructed and built has been in favor of Caucasian people. This here is a quote that I got from college that I've saved, and I revisit this quote quite often because I like it to humble my relationship with money, because a lot of times, a lot of things that happen in our lives or we see happening are happening because of the love of money, and a lot of injustices are happening because of money issues. This is Nathan Appleton of 1847 of New England, was in the business of making slave cloth for the 4 million slaves. He said slavery is a tremendous evil, but he would lose so much money if slavery was abolished. So he also said, no reason we of the free states should make ourselves unhappy about it. Why not leave it to the parties immediately involved? And this is what happens when we notice injustices, we become aware of injustices, and instead of doing something proactive, we turn and we walk away. I believe there is a danger of being a Caucasian individual who is collectively the majority of the population if you decide to stay uneducated and silent about the realities of racism, discrimination, and other oppressive forces. This silence allows oppressive forces to not only remain strong, but to gain in strength. I also feel you must do things to vividly announce to the public by means of where you stand as an ally against oppressive forces. I personally use my white privilege to being an active ally instead of just conveniently standing passively, just observing. I chose my vivid public announcement to be in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. I did this by getting my van vinyl wrapped as shown in these pictures. So wherever I go, it is clear that I am an ally of the BLM movement, fighting for justice, freedom, and against racism. I have also evolved to stand firmly against all forms of oppression. I'm going to read through these. Some of them you can't read at the bottom because that thing blocks it. No ableism, no ageism, no classism, no homophobia, no racism, no sexism, no speciesism. This might be something I'm going to introduce you all to tonight. No transphobia, no xenophobia or xenophobia. There's a couple translations on how you can pronounce that. Now I want everyone to kind of ponder over this question. When was the last time you discriminated against someone, and quite possibly at the cost of their life? Many people thinking about this question may be reflecting in their mind, I don't think I ever unfairly discriminated against anyone, especially at the cost of their life. I believe this is because many people have never spent much time really questioning the validity of the practices and choices they make every day. Instead, they make arbitrary choices rather than informed decisions. Here is the word we're going to focus on to mindfully answer this question: speciesism. Here is the picture of the environment in which this form of discrimination is committed by the majority of people. Speciesism is the first form of discrimination most of us were taught when we were children. Speciesism allows us to love one animal as a pet while deliberately harming and killing other animals that have the exact same characteristics as the animals that we choose to love. I believe most people eat animals and their secretion because that was their first form of discrimination taught as a child, and also because they don't have to do the dirty work of exploiting and killing these animals themselves. Instead, they support a system that exploits animals and marginalized human populations to work in slaughterhouses, which is one of the most dangerous jobs physically and mentally. I believe most people mistakenly assume veganism is some kind of new trend. It dates way back further than Martin Luther King Jr., but here are two quotes from him showing his field of compassion included animals even during his fight for the civil rights of Black humans. And I think that is very powerful. As a white male, I am cautious to use the term slave to describe the status of animals raised for food, but I do not hesitate to use this first quote by Martin Luther King Jr. I also think about how I and others are viewed as radicals in 2023, even though through King Jr. and others in history have had loving consideration for animals. And also right now, Black people are the fastest moving demographic embracing veganism. Martin Luther King Jr.'s wife and son, Dexter, chose veganism. His son, Dexter, even spent a significant amount of his time doing animal rights vegan activism, which is what I participate in doing right now. I'm going to let everyone kind of absorb those two quotes from Claretta. I love how it says, it doesn't matter how strong your opinions are. If you don't use your power for positive change, you are indeed part of the problem. As you guys are looking at that, I'm going to flip the screen here again. All right, to finally sum up, it does not take anything away from you to be able to empathetically stand up for others, including animals who are sentient beings. That's a paraphrase from River Phoenix. And then last, I got some information in here. Let me see if I can move this bar out of the way, because it's covering up my email. Hold on. Okay. All right, here's some of the books that I recommend reading. First one, White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism, is a very, very good book. I have a personal copy of this book. So if there's anyone locally around Lincoln or Omaha that would like to read this book, I'd happily share my book with the conditions that on goodwill that you tend to give it back to me. Also, you can go to the local libraries. I think it's cool. I know Lincoln has like 31 copies of the audio version of this book, which is great. That kind of shows me that there might be businesses that start like book clubs for their employees, and they all study the book together, because that's quite a few copies they have at the library. So I think that's good. The next book is Afroism, Essays on Pop Culture, Feminism, and Black Veganism. Again, I do have one of those copies that I would happily send out anywhere if anyone wants to have a copy of that book. And I could just share that with you. If you don't want to put your name on the chat during this presentation, there's my personal email down there below. You can always just reach out to me for anything, or if you want to have any of those books. And then the third book that I have 4 copies of that I really want to share with you tonight, because most people are new to this, or some people are, Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs, and Wear Cows by Melanie Joy. That's a good book by her. And I have 4 copies of that I would happily send anywhere. Just again, get a hold of me through my personal email and I can send those out. There are also some people that are on this presentation tonight that live in Omaha that they also said that they would be more than happy to lend their copies out too. And then there's these other 3 books. I don't necessarily have copies of them, but they are also good books to look into. And I think at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And then I'm going to give everyone the opportunity that you can comment or you can ask me questions. And I got a couple more things I'm going to share in the chat.